Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, found himself in a strange twist of fate. Instead of dictating his musical direction, he was relegated to playing rhythm guitar during recording sessions, earning a mere session fee. This was a far cry from his earlier days when he was the star, calling the shots. Behind closed doors, Scotty Moore, his longtime guitarist, and the powers at Hill and Range, led by Colonel Tom Parker and Freddie Bienstock, held the reins. They kept Elvis chained to recording soundtracks, a lucrative but creatively stifling endeavor. The music industry was changing in the 1960s. Songwriters wanted to be more than just suppliers of hits for Elvis. They wanted a fair share of the royalties. But why would they share when Elvis was a goldmine? His earlier success made it seem like any song he sang would be a hit. However, this approach was short-sighted. The industry was evolving, and Elvis was stuck in a rut. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, saw music as just another tool for promoting movies. He believed that as long as Elvis was making movies, he would continue to make money. But this mindset ignored a crucial fact: songwriters were tired of being taken advantage of. They wanted to write and record their own songs, rather than having Elvis sing their tunes with a hefty cut going to Parker and his associates. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the Beatles, were prime examples of what could have been. Had Elvis reached out to them, they would have been eager to write for him, as long as they got a fair deal. But Parker and Bienstock never considered this option. They clung to their old ways, even as the industry shifted. Elvis had the power to choose who wrote his songs. He could have asked top writers like Lennon and McCartney to create new material for him without the royalty demands that Parker insisted upon, but Elvis was afraid. He was afraid of losing the comfortable life Parker had provided, a life that had lifted him from poverty. The fear of being cut off by Parker and returning to the hardships of his childhood kept Elvis in line. Elvis's managers were not savvy when it came to money. They allowed Parker to take a huge percentage of the profits, and they made lavish personal purchases without much thought for the future. In 1962, despite earning tens of millions from movies, Elvis had to take out a mortgage to protect his beloved Graceland from being developed. To the world, Elvis appeared to be a wealthy, powerful rock star, but in reality, he felt trapped and limited. He wanted to tour Britain but never did because Parker didn't approve. Elvis's peers wondered how someone so commanding on stage could be so submissive off stage. The answer was fear of losing everything he had worked for. As the years went by, Elvis's role in movies became more about fulfilling contracts than creative expression. He would learn his lines in the car and spend his free time relaxing with friends, rather than focusing on his music. In the studio, he allowed the band to record backing tracks without him, and then dub his voice later. He was losing touch with the magic that once made him great. Elvis's decline was evident even in his own mocking comments about his performances. He watched as other films like Hal Wallis's Beckett received critical acclaim, while his own were criticized for prioritizing profit over artistry. The contrast between his potential and his reality was heartbreaking, a reminder of what could have been if he had taken control of his career and stood up for his artistic vision. In August 1965, Elvis Presley found himself facing a situation he was not entirely comfortable with. The Beatles, who had taken the music world by storm, were visiting his home in Bel Air. This encounter was not something Elvis had sought out. It was more of an arranged event orchestrated by his manager, the Colonel, who saw an opportunity for some good publicity. Elvis, however, was not thrilled about entertaining these musical newcomers. The day began like any other in the bustling household of 525 Perugia Way. Elvis and Priscilla, along with some friends, were watching TV in the den. The sound was turned off, but the atmosphere was tense. Everyone was dressed up as if preparing for a big event, even though they weren't quite sure what was happening. Priscilla, being closer in age to the Beatles, felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Elvis, on the other hand, was fidgeting with his Fender bass guitar, clearly uncomfortable. The Beatles arrived around 10:30 p.m. during a break in their tour of the United States. They came in a couple of cars, and the house was soon filled with the buzz of anticipation. Elvis wasn't exactly rushing to greet them. He knew how to be polite, but this felt different. The Colonel was there, along with the Beatles manager, Brian Epstein, and a few of their entourage. There was also a young journalist named Chris Hutchins, who had managed to get the Colonel to agree to this meeting. As the Beatles entered the room, the tension was palpable. Elvis and Priscilla were seated with some friends, but the atmosphere was stiff. The Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, looked around, their expressions a mix of curiosity and embarrassment. They had come to meet Elvis, but it was clear they were not sure how to break the ice. Elvis, feeling the pressure, didn't make the first move to greet them. He let the Beatles overflow into the room, taking over the space. It was an unusual scene, with the king of rock and roll seemingly intimidated by the Fab Four. The Colonel, trying to keep things moving, introduced everyone, but the conversation was slow to start. Elvis, known for his ability to put people at ease, found himself struggling here. The Beatles, despite their fame, seemed puzzled and a bit shy. They gazed at Elvis with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. It was as if they were trying to figure out how to interact with the legendary singer in front of them. Priscilla, feeling the tension, tried to lighten the mood. She had always been good at making people feel comfortable, even when she was nervous herself, but Elvis needed to make the first move. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke, his voice a bit shaky. "If you guys are just going to sit and stare at me, I'm going to bed," he said with a forced smile. The room erupted in a mix of laughter and awkward silence. The Beatles, relieved by Elvis's humor, broke the ice a bit more. They shared some stories and jokes, though it was clear they were still a bit out of their depth. Elvis, once he relaxed a bit, joined in the conversation, sharing some of his own experiences and stories from his career. The atmosphere slowly became more relaxed, but it was evident that this meeting was far from the easy exchange they had all hoped for. As the night went on, the Beatles expressed their admiration for Elvis, but it was clear they were more interested in the fan experience than in having a deep conversation. Elvis, sensing their genuine excitement, softened a bit more. He showed them around his home, sharing some of his favorite spots, like the garden where he often spent quiet moments. Despite the initial awkwardness, the evening ended on a more positive note. Elvis and the Beatles exchanged some parting words, and even managed a few photos together. Priscilla, relieved that it was over, felt a mix of emotions. She was proud of Elvis for trying to make the best of a difficult situation, but she also understood his discomfort. For Elvis, the meeting with the Beatles was a reminder of how different the music world had become. The Beatles represented a new era, one that was fast overtaking his own. Yet even in this moment of uncertainty, Elvis's charm and humor helped bridge the gap, if only for a short time. As the Beatles left, Elvis couldn't help but wonder what the future held, both for himself and for the music industry as a whole. Elvis's visit to Nashville in May 1966 marked a return to his roots. This time, however, things were different. The star who once dazzled crowds with his charisma and music now felt out of place in the very town that had launched his career. Nashville, with its smaller scale and familiar faces, reminded Elvis of simpler times. When Elvis arrived at Sun Records, the small studio where he first made his mark, he felt a wave of nostalgia. Sam Phillips, the man who discovered Elvis, was there. Sam often said that Elvis loved being in the studio, creating music that came from the heart. This was true for Elvis. It was a place where he felt free, away from the pressures of stardom, but times had changed. Elvis was no longer the young, carefree artist. The success and the lifestyle had taken their toll. In Nashville, he was reminded of this. People looked at him differently now. He was not just the kid from Tupelo anymore, he was a superstar, sometimes lost in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Elvis remembered the good times with his band, Bill Black included. Bill was a friend, a brother. They had shared countless moments on stage and in the studio. Those days were a source of joy for Elvis. He often thought about how much fun they had touring together, playing in small towns across the South. Those journeys were more precious to him than any of the big city performances. When Bill Black fell ill, Elvis visited him. He promised Bill's family that he would always be there for them if needed. This promise was not just about money or favors, it was about friendship. Elvis felt deeply for Bill, even if their paths had sometimes crossed over money issues. At the funeral, Elvis didn't go. He didn't want to turn it into a big event, something that would draw too much attention. But after the service, Bill's family came to Graceland, his home. There, Elvis could be himself. He shared stories of their time together, laughing and remembering. Elvis often reflected on those early days with Bill. He said, "Bill was a very great man. This comes as such a great shock to me. I can hardly explain how much I loved him." These words showed how much Bill meant to Elvis, beyond just being a colleague. Back in the studio at Sun Records, Elvis was making a new album. It was about faith and spirituality, something close to his heart. This was different from the flashy Hollywood-style albums he had been making lately. In the studio, Elvis felt a sense of peace. Here, he was just Elvis, making music that came from deep inside him. Sam Phillips was there, remembering the early days. He saw how music still brought joy to Elvis, how it connected him to his roots. Elvis would often talk about how the journey, the travels and performances were often more exciting than being in one place. But in the studio, surrounded by familiar sounds and people, he found comfort. Elvis's return to Nashville was a reminder of where it all began. It was a chance to reconnect with his past and the people who helped make his dreams come true. Though he was a star in Hollywood, in Nashville, he was just another musician, grateful for the music and the friendships that had shaped his life. In those quiet moments away from the spotlight, Elvis found solace. He knew that no matter how big his success got, the music and the people who loved it would always be a part of him, and in that, he found peace.